Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for our presentation of making a game plan. It centers around a discussion about the healthy return of athletes and fans. I'd like to introduce our presenters and our panelists. First off, my name is Mira Theisen. I'm an architect, senior project manager with the Sports, Recreation, and Entertainment practice at Perkins and Will, Denver. My co-presenter this morning is Jenna Cruff. She is an interior design director at Perkins and Will.
Hi, everyone.
And with us are our important panelists. We're really grateful to have them here this morning to have this discussion with us. First, we have Matt Whisenant, Deputy Director of Athletics at the University of Wyoming.
Thanks for having me.
And Anthony Grant, Director of Athletics at MIT.
Morning, glad to be on the panel.
And finally, Stu Halsall, Associate Vice Chancellor, Deputy Athletic Director, and Chief Operating Officer at the University of Denver.
Good morning, everyone.
We're here this morning because sports are important to us all, especially in these times of stay at home and isolation from friends and family. Sports are unlike anything else. They inspire togetherness, community, and well-being. We're all here to have a discussion about how universities are dealing with restrictions and why it's so important to have a game plan to bring sports back on campus, not only for athletes and staff but the community at large. Sports is one of the most missed activities, so we really are focusing on trying to help everyone find a game plan for bringing it back.
So I want to tell you all a little bit about how this came about. In February, when the pandemic began in its early stages, Perkins Will was approached by multiple healthcare and corporate clients for ideas and knowledge on planning a safe return after the COVID-19 and the shutdown. We compiled our research into a roadmap for return. The Sports and Recreation Entertainment team at Perkins and Will began developing roadmaps for athletic facilities and found the road to be extremely unpaved and full of obstacles. To forge a path forward, we began holding roundtable conversations with athletic leaders so they could share their approaches and hurdles. We are here today to share those voices. I mean, truly, that was the way that we found that everyone could figure out their path forward, was simply talking and listening to each other and sharing ideas. So the first step to bring sports back safely is having a game plan to bring athletes back safely. Later, our discussion will turn to competition and spectator events, but we want to begin by focusing on student athletes. The questions we have for our panelists today are based on topics that were most frequently raised in some of the talks we were having with our clients. And now Mira will start us off.
Thanks, Jenna. Before we start our questions, we do want to let the audience know that if you do have questions or comments that come up during our session, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and enter your question there. At the end of the presentation, we'll get to as many questions as we can, and others will answer at a later date. So please enter any and all questions you have. So we'll get started with our questions for our panelists. The biggest questions everyone is facing who returns, when do they return, and how can this be done safely? Our first question for the full group: are you planning on having fall sports, and how different will this season look? Stu, can you start us off?
Yes, thank you, Mira. At the University of Denver, we are planning on having fall sports. We are taking a phased approach to sport programs returning, and we're a little bit different. We're on the academic quarter system, so our start date is September 7th. So we've probably got a little bit more time in some cases than some other institutions related to some sport programs. But we've really developed some principles around how we're looking at that return. First and foremost is obviously health and safety. And I think many of us are dealing with screening, testing, tracing, cleaning, sanitation, all of those items. We are looking at it specifically by sport program and what are the implications by sport program, and really developing detail around each sport program. In some cases, we have on-campus and off-campus facilities. and that allows us to manage phasing in a different way between those facilities. A second principle that we're looking at is obviously the student athlete experience. We are mindful that the academic experience is going to be different, health and performance, mental health, housing is going to be different, and ultimately training and competition are going to be different. And so we're really trying to get our hands around all of those pieces and all of those areas to make sure we provide the best experience possible. We know the experience will be different, but we're trying to see how we can maximize and provide the best and quality experience that we can. Our third area is budget, and how we kind of do more with less around what we're doing for the fall. I think there's no doubt that, and I know we'll touch on it later, that revenues have been impacted. And then how we're looking at what we do with the budget is critical. At the University of Denver, we've already been impacted by furloughs and layoffs and different pieces. And so we've got to redefine what our personnel do and how we do it. And then finally, I think, we're focusing on the overall supporter experience. And so fans, donors, corporate entities, corporate partners, how do we maximize that experience? And I know we're going to talk about that later in another question.
Great, thanks, Stu. Matt, would you like to add on to that?
Sure. Like Stu said, and probably like a lot of institutions, we're utilizing a phased approach for the summer return. Obviously, we have Division I football, so getting our football players back in a safe way is vital for us from a number of areas, including from a financial standpoint. I'll get into more details later on the phased approach, what that looks like going through from their day to day and how we do that from a health and safety standpoint. I think ideally, big picture, all of us are grappling with the question of trying to minimize the impact on your student athletes, your coaches, your staff, and your fans. But we all know there's going to be changes, as Stu alluded to, and from a student athlete standpoint, it's going to impact them academically, athletically, and personally. Academically, are they taking more online classes? It's more flex, hybrid types. Athletically, are you practicing different, smaller groups? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Everybody's wearing face masks and face guards. Travel from testing, as Stu alluded to, the testing, the tracing. What does that look like? How are you doing that? From the coach's standpoint, they've been dealing with it. How do you recruit? Institutions have been shut down. We have a new men's basketball staff. They recruited every student athlete virtually. They didn't get to see one of them in person. So, but that's the landscape we're living in. And obviously from the fans, again, focusing on football, but it impacts all of our sports, from how they buy tickets to pregame to tailgating to can they even attend? Are we going to have fans, or is it a limited, reduced capacity? What does that look like? So everything's impacted, everything's fluid. But again, trying to minimize that as much as we can and create a safe environment.
Great, thank you. Anthony, I know your picture's a little different. Would you like to explain?
Sure, thanks, Mira. MIT has not announced what the format will be relative to a safe return for its student population. We anticipate having an announcement hopefully by the end of the month, early next month. So as a result, we do not have a decision made yet about the return of fall sports for our student athletes. So, as we are engaging in dialogue across campus and preparing for multiple scenarios that are being put forth, we in the athletics department have to model consistent with those scenarios that are being put forward. We would love to have our student athletes back. We'd love to sponsor fall sports, but similar to what was already said, it has to be one, in line with the overall mission of the institution, but we also have to make sure that we're bringing our students back our student athletes back if we can, in a phased and safe way, prioritizing health and safety, the academic experience, and then also what the athletics experience could potentially be. So while the picture is a little blurry right now, my staff and I have been, modeling a bunch of different options. So whenever that ultimate decision is made, we can execute it accordingly.
Great. I think you guys just in a nutshell explained a lot of the questions we'll be, moving on here within the presentation. So that was a good introduction to, I think, a lot of the challenges. So the next question is, what role do the physical limitations of your facilities play into your decisions about who returns? Anthony, being an urban school on the East Coast, does this factor significantly for you?
It does, on a number of different levels. One, our facilities are limited in size, particularly our indoor facilities. Later on in the presentation, I believe there's a diagram of our athletic training facility, which is about 3,500 square feet. And, based off of the CDC guidelines and other state and institutional parameters, social distancing is extremely important, particularly in the early phases of a return to play scenario. And, based off of the limitations of our facilities, we can only get a small number of students and staff in a building at one particular point in time. And so, when you're looking at, a football roster for us of about 85, you can only get, 6 or 7 student athletes in the facility, not even talking about, the football locker room. By the time you get everybody, checked out and suited up, the practice window that we have might be over. So, you have to, the facilities definitely have an impact on what we do. As an urban institution, we are landlocked. So, there's no room for real expansion. I've read that some institutions are able to put kind of temporary facilities, to expand the outside presence. We can do that to a certain extent, but we're limited from that perspective. And, one last thing that we need to think about that's not necessarily dictated by our facilities, but the fact as an urban institution is that when you look at, the density within, Cambridge and the Boston area, we have several major institutions in a very relatively small footprint. So when we bring students back to campus, that's going to increase the population significantly. And, one of the reasons for everybody leaving campus was to not put pressure on the medical system. So when we bring students back to campus, we have to look collectively, relative to the other institutions and what they're doing. And that has impact across the board in terms of how we need to be responsible in considering the health and safety of the broader community within Cambridge and Boston areas.
Right. So really a lot to consider, not just for your specific university, but all those around you as well. Do you want to say something about this as well?
Yeah, I think I would share, as some other folks maybe, we have a shared use facility that serves multi-functions of the campus. We serve obviously intercollegiate athletics. We also serve recreation, and we're also home to our health and counseling center, all within the same building. For us, that presents probably thinking about things differently. We're really being mindful about how we're going to be directing traffic through entrance points and how we're managing that, how we're dedicating specific spaces to serve different uses, and how we go about maximizing that. We're also in conversations with our campus about other spaces that could be used, and with off-campus partners also as a potential. We, in the city of Denver, we're fortunate that there's a number of other facilities and we have great relationships, and we're trying to work on leverage those to just maximize our opportunities. But the shared use space, we're trying to be very deliberate and be very mindful, particularly when we've got the health and counseling center, which creates an interesting component in how we've got to manage that, and be very deliberate in how that's done.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mira, if I can, to piggyback off of Stu, we also have shared use facilities as well. DAPER is home to varsity athletics, campus recreation, intramurals, club sports. I feel like I'm missing one, but we have a physical education and wellness, and so we run the gambit in terms of the community that we serve. so that we're also needing to consider those options in terms of how we schedule and navigate the space. And then since our academic classes are going to need to be restructured, we're going to also need to think about, how we're providing opportunities for them to use our spaces as well.
Right. Yeah, academics does play into those multi-use facilities quite a bit. So that's a good point. Jenna, would you like to speak to the next slide?
Mira, on the note, she's saying she's got a bad connection, so you might want to take this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So as we turn to actual facilities, immediate thinking centers on the individual athlete and small group settings. When planning for a phase 1 reopening, physical distancing in a facility can be quite manageable. I think Anthony also stated that for them it is quite of a challenge because they don't have the space that you sometimes see on more open campuses. The image in front of you, it shows a 6-foot distancing model, and that has come into question in exercise facilities. It may be more of the 10 or 12 foot. As we've been talking to athletic directors, that's something that is kind of a fluid thing in managing equipment and athletes in a space. So on these diagrams, the red circles indicate, for the distancing requirements, facilities or in this instance, locker spaces that would not be available. So it really does limit your use of these spaces, and that's illustrating part of the challenges that athletics has on campus. We've been diagramming these scenarios for clients to help them plan and make decisions. This diagram that we're showing right here is of the UNLV football locker room. And it just demonstrates, especially in the case of football, where you've got 80 to 120 athletes, how do you accommodate that and provide the physical distancing? Matt, with the football season starting and some athletes already back, are you addressing this in the near future? And what challenges do you anticipate as we move from individual and small group training back to a full team scenario?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a tough one. Right now, obviously, with our summer approach, we're able to easily social distance, like many of us, using much smaller groups. We're fortunate enough at Wyoming to have recently renovated facilities where we went from about a 48,000 square foot facility to 118,000 square foot with multiple weight rooms and things like that. So we have some flexibility maybe that Stu or Anthony don't have. That said, when you're trying to accommodate 120 football players and socially distance, that becomes tough. From a locker room standpoint, we're actually not utilizing our locker rooms right now. So actually right now in the summer, we're just working out in much smaller groups. And I think in a later slide, I'll get into some detail about how we walk through the building and all the protocols we have in place there. But right now, we're not even utilizing that. But we have discussed what does that look like down the road with regards to socially distancing in the locker room, whether that's utilizing additional spaces, taking some other flex spaces to use in locker rooms, using locker rooms and other facilities that we have, and what other things we can do. Even to the point, the questions of what do you do from a practice standpoint? You divide your practices up so you have smaller groups and practices, so not everybody's in the locker room at the same time. So right now, everything is on the table, and just trying to be as flexible as we can, because what's accurate today may not be accurate in August when preseason starts or when you play your first game September 5th. So just going through those policies and processes to see what we can do and be flexible.
Right. Yeah, it'll be a fluid scenario, I think, for a long time. Stu, you mentioned your school schedule is slightly more forgiving. What do your plans look like?
Yeah, I think very similar dialogue as Matt. I mean, obviously we're, I think we're all faced with state and potentially city or localized guidance that's driving what we can do and when we can do it. I think we're obviously, we've been working with our campus to really how can we start to put some people together in a phased approach carefully, and how we do that and what protocols are around that. And we're really trying to define that, because obviously, you know, kind of working between the individualized or the small group to larger groups is going to take some work and have some different protocols around that. And so we're really being diligent and kind of working around that. And obviously we're trying to use our biggest spaces at this time to accommodate all of those things, and work through them. We're even repurposing some spaces to serve different functions during that time,
Enter your meeting
to
ID,
help us.
followed by
Okay, I'm sorry, Stu, there was a little bit of feedback there. Were you complete with what you were wanting to say?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. So, you know, one thing we are looking at now is successful athletic programs encompass the overall well-being of student athletes, including academics, nutrition, mental and emotional health, in addition to physical fitness. Student well-being was an item central to our discussions and planning prior to COVID-19. And, you know, it's centered around comprehensive student athlete well-being. With the health precautions related to COVID-19, well-being has become a bigger and more complex topic. We'd like to address the central issue to this in the next question.
And I'll just say apologies to everyone. I lost my computer audio because this is the fun times of working from home. So I'm on my phone. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Okay, great. Yeah, Jenna, I can. So the question we're on is, how are you addressing well-being for student athletes before the pandemic? And how has your approach changed for fall? Anthony, could you start?
Sure. Similar to all of us across the country, you know, we're keenly attuned to the needs of our student athletes from a health and well-being perspective. You know, we've engaged in several programs, speakers, and develop relationships across campus to ensure that our student athletes have what they need in order to be successful. One of the key components for many of our student athletes in terms of balancing the academic pressures, you know, and life pressures, is to being able to participate in your respective sport. You know, being an athlete is a huge part of their identity. And, you know, when everything's in a normal state, having that outlet for them is really helpful in order to strengthen their overall well-being. When you move into the pandemic and you're in a situation where winter championships canceled, spring sports canceled, it's devastating, you know, for student athletes. It's extremely devastating for athletic administrators to stand in front, you know,
Right.
the student athletes to relay that information. Although we all know that ultimately it was the right decision. We had to do it. It was still difficult in and of itself. You know, our heart continues to go out for the seniors who, you know, had their, you know, their opportunities come to an end. Now, you can go into depth, you know, with allocations or opportunities for those student athletes to have an additional season of eligibility, and that's not necessarily for this conversation, but, you know, there are, you know, some reprieves from that. But in general, this is a very, very difficult time for all of us and our student athletes in particular. And so as students left campus, we were very focused on making sure they're okay, having various touch points, either from an overall athletic department standpoint or a team by team basis. One, to make sure that they got to their homes or other places safely. Two, to find out how they're transitioning with this new virtual world in order for them to be able to complete their academics. You know, putting opportunities out there for resources for health, nutrition, and things of that nature. And so as, you know, this pandemic continues to move forward based off of what cohort of student or student athlete is going to be on campus, it's going to be extremely important for us to continue to have those touch points, continue to engage in some level of team activity to the extent possible in order to facilitate that dialogue, and then provide resources for them and connections across campus, if they're experiencing some significant, mental health issues. But at the end of the day, we're here for our student athletes. We need to make sure they're taken care of. That was, what it was prior to the pandemic, and it's, heightened even more so now with the pandemic.
Right. Stu, does some of that resonate with what you're also seeing at DU?
Yeah, I think Anthony touched on a lot of the different points there, and I would just add, I think we listened a lot this spring. Obviously, it was a very reactionary scenario this spring with what happened, and I think many of us were scrambling to get items in place. And so in regards to wellness, obviously with our coaches and with our administrative team, we created a lot of programming that we were hearing that we delivered virtually throughout that time. And I think some of that will continue as we move forward. I think some of that has resonated in allowing different discussions to occur. But I also think as we think about moving to the fall and transitioning back, we're looking at some particular programs to try and help around this. And one of those is we're trying to implement or working to implement a positive leadership program. I think in helping student athletes navigate this time and kind of really building that and how they can access things and how they can mobilize. I think sometimes we share the content and share the information and share the resources, but our belief is we're going to have to help them through action a little bit more. And so we'll be taking a little bit more of a hands-on approach with them in those regards.
Great.
And I would add one more piece to that. When we left campus, it was more of a scenario of, what's happening to them, what's happening to us. There was really no agency. There was no time for them to engage in the decision-making process. So now as we look to the fall, we're a lot more intentional with speaking with, our student leadership to get a sense of how they feel and, talk to them about what the experiences could be like for them on campus, not only athletically, but academically, and really be very focused on hearing from them about what their specific needs will be.
Great. Thanks, Anthony.
Now that I'm back on audio, so with this, we've been just studying a lot of different options to facilitate the continued holistic development and well-being of student athletes, which is what you all have been talking about. How do we keep people whole and together through all of this? One of the things we've been studying is temporary or permanent outdoor structures for team dining, because we find that like nutrition and eating, the actual act of eating a meal together, really does wonders for how teams and athletes get along. Socializing, academic sessions, so that's not falling behind, and team strategy meetings. Matt, I think this might apply to you a little bit more because you have space in Wyoming and with football, but for football teams, the dynamics are so critical to the success on the field. Are you worried right now about maintaining those team relationships?
No question. Obviously, a big part of our recent success has been that, we've built a culture, a very tight-knit family, tight-knit group. And a lot of that has to do with your facilities. And so, that bond, that closeness you have, it doesn't just occur on the practice field or in the games. It occurs, like you said, when you're eating together, when you're lifting together, when you're hanging out in the team lounge, you're hanging out in the locker room and all those types of things. As I stated before, we're fortunate enough to have the facilities now to accommodate and do a lot of things. But there is obviously the fear with the social distancing and things like that. For example, our training table, we're one of the few schools in the Mountain West that has a true training table. But now most of our meals, like probably many schools, are going to be to go. So you're going to go in, you're going to get your food, you're going to be able to feed them, but they're not going to be able to sit down, have that camaraderie, not just internally with the football team, as they sit down with basketball players and swimmers and wrestlers and develop that camaraderie with other other student athletes, you lose that. And so obviously we all hope this is for the short term, but your point is well taken. Obviously looking at these other structures, these temporary facilities, are there things you can do to ensure that those relationships stay? So obviously we're hoping this is just short term, because we have seen, no question, a benefit from having those facilities, and our student athletes, again, not just football, but all of our student athletes being able to do more things together outside of just practice and competition.
Thank you for that. Mira, do you want to move on to sports medicine a little bit?
Yeah, one of the key areas of concern we've heard is ensuring that the staff who take care of athletes stay healthy themselves. Many have to be in close contact. It's an integral part of sports medicine and therapy, strength and conditioning, sometimes as well. What precautions do you have for sports medicine and these type of activities for staff who are required to make closer contact with student athletes? And what temporary facility changes are you anticipating? And do you feel these changes may be permanent? Stu, could you start?
Sure. At the University of Denver, I think our health and performance team has actually pretty much remained active throughout this time. At this point, we had student athletes who either were just coming out of surgery or needed some post-operative care or rehabilitation, and our university agreed that we could do that under obviously strict criteria as we're working through that. And so we've been fortunate that we've leveraged some tremendous external partners to help us also. We've got Centura Health as a partner, National Jewish Hospital, and CU Health, who have all extended their expertise into this area, which has been really helpful for our team and staff of collaborating on best practices and what to do and how we can efficiently operate. And we've also worked with our Health and Counseling Center, which is in the building also. Obviously, all of our employees follow basically the state and city required protocols, screening, PPE, strict cleaning, disinfection procedures continually. And obviously we've had to modify all the different products in the building to be able to kind of meet those. We're in discussions right now on UV lighting and is that worth looking at and those types of pieces. But really, following those strict guidelines. And then we've modified spaces to just, obviously, we've gone to that, we've used 10 feet as the guideline just across our athletic spaces to just help us maintain that physical distancing component.
Great, thank you. I know, Anthony, you've got some diagrams here that help illustrate how you guys are approaching this subject.
Sure. Similar to what Stu articulated, we're ensuring that our athletic training and the sports performance staff are protected. We're following same guidelines relative to state and local ordinances, ACHA guidelines, NATA guidelines as well. We also, our athletic training staff are working in concert with MIT Medical, who is putting together the reentry plan for our students and staff across the board. So obviously looking at attestation, screening, all of those things. So when we look at our facility, I made mention earlier in the presentation that our athletic training facility is about 3,500 square feet. As you see the breakout of how the room could be broken out. So the current layout is, if you're looking at the screens, it's to the upper right. And you can really see the orange with the number of tables that we have. Probably a lot smaller than what Matt's dealing with over at Wyoming. But you see what we have in a normal situation. And then when you move to the proposed layout, we've taken several of those tables out and spread them around the room a little bit more. The blue dots are the students. So you're looking at about five that are engaging in treatment, with a holding room that will only fit two. The green dots are the staff, and you see the distancing there. We're looking at about 6 to 10 foot, type of social distancing as well. To reference a question that was in the chat, this heightened disinfecting is going to be paramount to what we're doing. And as students cycle in and out, we need to make sure that we're spraying down and wiping off the surfaces on a much more regular basis. So that just gives a glimpse of what we're looking at relative to our facilities at MIT.
Have you, just a question real quick, had to install temporary like hand washing facilities similar to what you might see going up in an arena or an outdoor venue? Has that been?
Yeah, in terms of the Purell stations or something?
Even water, soap and water type stations? We
have not specifically, but I'm sure that's something that as we look to see how we can more efficiently execute this, is definitely something to discuss.
Right. Great.
And
thank you.
so I just want to add as well, so we'll get into this in a little bit, but as far as UV disinfection, we've kind of really been studying how that could be so effective, but then you have to calculate the HVAC of the room and the correct dosage of the lights and make sure that the existing finishes in the space can stand up to the intensity of the UV and that it's not going to destroy everything in the room. So we've just been finding there's really no easy solutions for disinfection.
So I think we touched on this a little bit with our previous conversation, but the next question is when and how are student athletes and staff screened for illness? And probably the when is more what we can address here, since we talked a little bit about the how. Anthony, do you want to start?
Sure. As I alluded to earlier, our screening and testing protocols are going to be in line, as a baseline anyway, with what will be required of all MIT students and staff upon returning to campus. With regards to the high level of contact our student athletes have engaging in their respective sports, that risk is heightened. So we may need to look at increased testing. Right now, what we're talking about on our campus for the general student body is a once a week swab testing regimen with daily attestations and things of that nature. But we're still in the process of talking through what would be required for our student athletes above and beyond that. Also engaging with our conference to set agreements for how we are going to inform host institutions or visiting institutions that student athletes that'll be visiting their campus, are symptom free. But again, I think it was said earlier that there is going to be, some level of risk. This is not going to be a risk-free environment. And so all we can do is try to put the protocols in to mitigate that risk to the extent possible and communicate very thoroughly with all of our constituents.
Well, thank you. Matt, I know Wyoming's been looking at this as well. Can you elaborate on what you're doing there?
Yeah, I wanted to go a little bit more into I know I had talked previously about our phased approach. So we started on June 1st, and we brought back about 80 student athletes with the focus on football, about 70 football student athletes, a handful of men's basketball, women's basketball. And what we're doing is essentially about every 2 weeks, we're bringing in more student athletes. We have a 14-day mandatory quarantine. We've worked this through our Department of Health and our campus. So all of our student athletes quarantine, all of us are being tested the first week of quarantine. And then after that, then we start small after the quarantine is over, and assuming there's a negative testing, then they're allowed to get in our facilities. So on a day-to-day, what we're doing is we have a biometric access to our facilities, and we've cut those off. So again, our student athletes cannot get in our facilities without someone letting them in. So we're trying to minimize the risk and minimize the variables for them to be any type of contaminant. So on a day-to-day basis, what that looks like is after our quarantine, if our student athletes are working out in our facilities, they would meet at a set location. They'd wear masks. We do a temperature check, a symptom check. That's daily. They then come in the facility. They have a path that we've outlined. They go into, let's say they're going to work out. They go into the weight room. They have socially distanced in the weight room, only limited capacity. We have cleaning protocols for before, during, and after. I know Anthony mentioned that. So did Stu. Same thing. We have a process in which they pick up and drop off their clothes, their dirty workout stuff, because they work out twice a day. We have a process which they pick up their food and how that looks. So everything is very detailed to, again, try to minimize the risk. But as Anthony said, there is risk, but try to minimize the risk as much as you can to ensure their safety and health.
Great, thank you.
Matt, that actually transitions nicely into this slide. This is, we just kind of started mapping out different analyses, and this is analyses of the UNLV football training facility. And what you spoke of, you know, we can wear masks, but are you, I actually wonder if you're going to be having athletes wear masks while they're working out, or if you're going to be spacing them farther apart, or what your concerns are for that.
We are encouraging our student athletes to wear masks at all times, but if they're uncomfortable during their workouts, or if you have someone that has, you know, has asthma or something like that, then they're allowed to take their mask off. But if they're just walking through the facility, they're required to wear it. But so workouts, we give them some flexibility. Obviously outside, we give them more flexibility, but we've already seen it as we've begun this week with workouts. We have some student athletes that are wearing it the whole time, and some as they're outside, or maybe if they're, you know, lifting heavy, they'll take it down, then they'll put it back up.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Like I said, every facility is unique. So we have been doing some of these analyses of what are the best options, what are the circulation paths, and then making recommendations within clients' budgets for door modifications, or UV perhaps, different things that we could do, outdoor temporary or permanent structures. But I think one of the biggest things we've been hearing about is HVAC, which Mira is going to talk about now.
Right. Yeah, improving indoor air quality is one of the you know, most effective things you can do after physical distancing and disinfection. We've been fielding calls from clients about HVAC systems and upgrades, and talking with our go-to engineers on this subject. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. So if you are looking to improve indoor air quality, it is important to make sure you know an engineering firm that can kind of help you do that, looking at increased ventilation rates, higher filtration, and adjusting operating hours. And then the UV thing is I think something that holds promise, but you do have to you know, just be careful of your finishes and things that might be impacted by that increased UV light on a daily basis. So now we're going to transition to planning for competition. So going more to the spectator venue, what are the challenges in hosting and, you know, competitions?
And I will just say, I mean, we focus on the athletes, but really in-person contests are the heart of sports. It's why we all cheer for our teams, but how to host competitions that are safe for student athletes, coaches, staff, and spectators is one of the biggest challenges we are facing. While Division III has reduced the required contests by 33%, Division I has taken the position that fall championships remain unchanged. So this is why we wanted to really talk about this for this next section. The first question I want to ask is, I want to preface it by saying, because of the ever-changing environment, plans for fall competitions are just starting to be released. Are there conference-wide protocols you will be adopting, or has it been left up to your university? And what are your current travel considerations for those team games that you have to travel to? Matt and Stu, I know as D1 schools with different key sports, I wonder what your take on this is. Stu, could you start?
Yes, we obviously, University of Denver, we're a little bit unique. We're actually in multiple conferences for a lot of different sports. The information we're receiving from those conferences, while we're in dialogue with the conferences, is right now it's they're putting the guidance more to the institution in our experience. And so we're obviously working through that. Our approach more specifically focused on the fall immediately has on non-conference schedules has been focused more moving to a regional schedule. For some of our sports, that means playing an institution home and away. We're limited obviously with our geography in the Rocky Mountain region. We still have to cover large distances. Unlike some other locations in the U.S., like the East Coast, probably with Anthony, and some other pieces where we are geographically challenged in doing that. So we are going to have to travel to meet that criteria. We've been looking at and obviously tracking what's happening within regions and states and those types of things, and having open dialogue with institutions around those pieces related to travel, and how we do that. And then also trying to understand what protocols are going to exist. And I think this is, Matt referenced this and Anthony referenced it, is what protocols exist at other campuses that we're going to have to be mindful of in relation to travel, and how are we aligning those pieces. I think something that's going to get pulled together eventually at a conference level. I think those dialogues are happening, but but we have to recognize there's institutions with probably different abilities also. Some campuses are talking about testing. There's discussion out there of some campuses may not be, or they may still be in an online education environment versus a physical. And so I think there's lots of considerations around what we're doing. We're looking at all travel methods and we're evaluating them right now, right? I mean, there's obviously bus transportation, plane transportation, charter transportation. We're evaluating all the merits of those things and trying to put all of those scenarios together. And again, going back to providing the optimum health and safety that we can, that's how we'll formulate those decisions when we get there. But schedules are dramatically still shifting in our experience. Many institutions are facing directives from institutions of where they're allowed to travel, potentially budget scenarios. And so I think this is still a fluid piece that we're working on and getting our arms around.
And then Matt, could you add on to this? I know football's travel schedule is fairly set at this point, is it not?
Sure. Now, I think, from a conference standpoint, there's kind of two pieces to it. You have, as Stu alluded to, the testing component. I'm on our Mountain West Health and Safety Committee, and we meet twice a week, and that's what we're discussing, right? Is what does that protocol look like to establish some type of testing baseline? As Stu alluded to, if you're going to go play another team, what do they do testing wise, especially in the sport of football? If we have a team come in here and they're not testing, are we going to play that team? Or how is that going to work out? If we're going to this year, we go to Louisiana. If they have different protocols than us, and it doesn't match up to what we want, how's that going to play out? So don't have those answers. Again, more questions than answers, but those are the types of discussions we're having at the conference level to set some baselines as far as the testing to ensure, again, the safety and health of our student athletes, and not just for football. We're having the same discussions again with other sports. And does that vary from sport to sport, or is it consistent across all sports? And that's what we're trying to finalize. Obviously, from the other conference component, then you have the budget pieces we've all talked about. We're all worried about what does that look like, and our conference has worked to put some various proposals or various parameters in place with regards to reduced competitions, reduced travel parties, modifications or cancellations of championships. Again, that's more just purely from budget constraints. With regards to your question on travel, you're exactly right with football and all of our sports, but especially football, because you're talking about travel parties of 160 plus. We're really streamlining that travel party. Boosters won't be on the trips. We're greatly reducing the number of athletic department personnel, whether that's administrators or streamlining the number of trainers and strength staff and communication staff and audiovisual and all that, trying to get as streamlined as we can so we have as few people as we can to adequately support student athletes and again minimize the risk.
Like I said, there's a lot of moving pieces, but you brought up the economics piece, which I think Mira is now going to get into a little bit.
Yeah, and just for ourselves and the panelists, we're approaching the hour, so we just need to be cognizant of time a little bit. This has been a great discussion. But in terms of revenues, have you projected impact of loss in seating capacity concession revenues at your venues? And how does economic viability impact your decisions for fall? Matt, can you speak to this first? Because football is a big economic driver.
Sure. I mean, I think like every school, especially with Division I football, we've all looked at it. We've all looked at the different scenarios from no fans to reduced or limited capacity, whatever that would mean. For us, that could mean the loss of a few $100,000 to well over $10 million. Again, with a school with a budget, we have roughly a budget of $40 million, 21 million of which is self-generated. A loss of $10 million is catastrophic. And it's catastrophic to the whole athletic department and the university and the community. We don't have fans. So it's obviously beyond just the football program.
Right. And Stu, what is that looking like for you guys?
Yeah, we're slightly different, obviously, with not having football, but yeah, I mean, obviously the economics are still a major driver. We've already, you know, our projected loss of revenue right now is 6 million. And so even in an institution like the University of Denver, these impacts are still significant in what we're doing. And the dominoes are, our campus is not just going to pick up $6 million. We're having to make very tough decisions in how we're addressing and doing that. I think one of the important things here, I have to ask a tough question, which is what can we stop doing in the short term, and what can we get out of and not prioritize and really focus on around the economics of what we're doing. We're also mindful, you know, we're in the city of Denver, and we're fortunate that we have a kind of a major sports hub in many ways. We've got, you know, professional teams across soccer, football, lacrosse, and there's a group in Denver that we're plugged into that obviously we're discussing the scenarios of what spectator seating may look like. And, you know, football is going to be the first. The models out there that we're hearing in the state of Colorado is potentially 25% right now that would be permitted, potentially moving up to 50%. But I think there's a long road to cover between what that reality is. And for us, hockey is probably our biggest driver, which would start in October, which based on what you read and those types of things, right, there could be different challenges at that point also.
Great, thanks, Stu. Jenna's now going to speak to some different revenue generating ideas possibly that could work on some campuses.
Yes, because Matt kind of brought it up, the whole idea with revenue generation is also it's that fan base and that community there who generates the revenue. But so we've been looking into ideas for revenue generation that align with different CDC risk categories. CDC just recently came out with their events risk guidelines for more risk, higher risk, highest risk, et cetera. But for example, we're looking at different viewing experiences that allow people to safely experience the game together and bond as a student body or community. Are you looking into different possibilities? Matt, I'll throw this one to you because here we're showing some preliminary ideas for viewing and tailgating at the University of Wyoming. So we're showing potential individual student viewing in rooms with practice fields with video screens, tailgating for household viewing opportunities. Are you looking into anything?
Well, obviously, everything's on the table as we talked about, especially if we're looking at reduced or limited capacity, which is what we're looking at currently with football. You know, you have to meet your contractual obligations, you know, with your corporate sponsors and things like that. So there are some limitations, but you just have to be creative. And some of the things we've looked at is we have an 11,000 seat basketball arena. So if we have a limited capacity in our football stadium, could we show the games? Could we sell, you know, tickets so people can still tailgate and enjoy the game day atmosphere, but maybe they can't get in the football stadium because of reduced capacity, but could we sell tickets and they watch it in the basketball arena on the video boards? You know, you show some additional tailgating down here in our South practice field. That's another thing we're looking at. Can we expand our tailgating, which is typically done in our indoor football facility? That's where it's typically done, but can we spread that out? And even the creative idea of we're looking at partnering with a company and having to drive up movies. So not necessarily on the day of a football game, but we have, you know, additional parking that we can have a screen put up and almost like your old school drive-in movies where you can get up, you can pull in, stay in your car, socially distance, bring your own food and enjoy a movie. So you have that community feel too. So everything's on the table at this point, trying to be as creative as we can.
And so then, Stu, you had mentioned looking at campus-wide options. I am going to say if we could keep it a little brief because I think we're running a bit long. But do you want to talk about that?
We can go about 5 minutes long, so let's do our best.
There's just a lot to cover.
Yeah.
I'll just add really quick. We've reached out to some of our strong campus partnerships. We have a great school of hospitality on campus and trying to look at how we might create some unique experiences with them. We have an outstanding data analytics program in our Daniels College of Business, and can we create a whole new and different type of experience around those things? And so I do think during this time, campus partnerships are going to be critical to help with some of this.
And I think that you're also actually finishing up a 5G upgrade you had mentioned, because what we're looking at too is 5G technology. It allows for wireless cameras and all new possibilities for digital engagement. And it really is poised to change the fan experience of sports. It can allow teams to offer, it could at this point, allow them to offer an upgraded at-home viewing package. Are you guys, I know that, so you're looking into the 5G since you're finishing it, but is everyone else, Anthony, specifically looking into increasing technology and broadcasting?
Yeah, I'll be brief. We're going to have to. We're based off our revenue generation model and other considerations. We're not going to have fans in the stands. That's not a revenue generator for us. And we're definitely taking our fair share of a financial hit, but it's not coming from that particular area. So if we are able to have athletics resume in the fall, we do want to have our fans to be able to support our student athletes. So inevitably we will have to do some level of upgrade relative to our streaming services.
So the next slide just illustrates some of the challenges in not only being in a venue, but getting fans to the venue and crowd management. The big question is how are you managing crowds, and will spectators be screened before they can enter a facility? Matt, could you touch on that with what you're doing at Wyoming?
I will. I'll be quick. I know we're getting short on time. So obviously we're finalizing all our policies and procedures, and we've all said everything is fluid. Planned, limited, reduced capacity. Our fans will be strongly encouraged to wear face masks and face guards. We're actually going to disseminate them. We'll use social distances as they enter the gates. We're going to have hand sanitizers. Everything will be laid out as far as signage and things like that. Probably one of the unique things we're doing is we're establishing what we call gold zones in our stadium, and that will be locations in our stadium which if you don't feel safe because someone next to you or near you doesn't have a face mask on, those gold zones, you have to wear a face mask, and we will mandate the social distancing. So there'll actually be locations in the stadium where those would be mandated, but there'll be other locations where you may be with your family member and you sit right next to them. So we are utilizing that. And obviously, proper messaging before, during, and after as much as we can to ensure our fans feel safe and understand what the protocols are in place.
Yeah, those designated areas sound like a great idea. Same applies to indoor facilities, and I think, Stu, you touched on this before, where you've got kind of a multi-use venue where you've got a lot of things going on in the same building. Just real quick, can you just describe a little bit about how you're managing circulation for those spaces?
Yeah, we're basically doing a transactional analysis of the customer in essence, and every step along the way, and obviously trying to, our parking is spread around the building, so we're trying to link everything from directions to entry point to zone of where they would be, to link all of those things so that it is much more manageable. And then obviously aligning services with those sections. I think Matt pointed out, yeah, we're going to be dealing with physical distancing and different zones and those types of pieces, but we're really going to, rather than probably looking at just a free-flowing arena, we're probably looking at a zone concept that's got dedicated points to be able to be managed.
Great, thank you.
And so that kind of segs nicely into, so we can develop these protocols and policies, but they're only effective if people actually follow them. And so I think how people are communicating policies and enforcing them is a really big question out there right now. Matt, do you want to speak to this some?
Sure. I think we're utilizing various mediums, probably like all of us are, from social to old school newspaper to emails to radio. We're using our Department of Transportation, your websites, video boards, you name it. We're putting out our policies and procedures throughout the community, local restaurants and bars. So as fans come in, they see those. So as much as you can to try to blanket, what your policies and procedures are, so fans know. I think the biggest piece we all talked about is there is a risk. So you're trying to outline what your policies and procedures are, so fans know that coming in the door, and they can make a decision whether they feel safe coming or not. Obviously, we all of us institutionally think we have good policies and procedures in place, but there is risk. And so we just want to make sure they know that before they walk in the door, so they can have a great time while they're at the event.
Mm-hmm. Stu, did you want to add on to that one?
No, I think Matt covered, so I think we're good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I will say, one of the things we've been hearing about is from a lot of clients and cities, it's because policies are different everywhere you go, it becomes really hard. So trying to keep messaging consistent across the board and also positive. We've been finding that people don't like being told what to do. So as much as we can inspire people to want to take these actions and follow these behaviors, I think that's the better way to go about things.
These next few slides, I feel like we've touched on already about capacity issues and, how important it is for the student athlete and their identity and their well-being. So I think I'd like to turn it to answering a few of the Q&A questions that have come in, if we could, and hopefully we can get some of those answered. Jenna, do you want to take that?
Sure. Actually, if you can, let me just pull some up. This is a good one. I think that this is directed towards those who have student athletes back already. What kind of behavior are you observing so far among your student athletes who have come back as of June 1st, or during their quarantine, and then maybe now that they're out of their quarantine? Matt, maybe perhaps you could answer that one?
Sure, I can go. I mean, I think first of all, you have to define quarantine. That's another one. Every institution, the quarantine is different. So our quarantine essentially is basically restricted movement, where we're telling our student athletes, hey, you don't necessarily have to stay in your apartment or dorm, but if you go out, if you're by yourself, socially distanced, if you want to go for a hike, ride a bike, but we don't want you going to the grocery stores. We don't want you going downtown. We don't want you doing those things. Our student athletes have been good as far as we can tell. Now you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds, so you kind of get what you get when you bring them back. But they've been good. We were fortunate. Our first round of testing, we tested about 160 student athletes and staff and coaches. We had 0 positives. So it's been good. The fear is obviously as the summer continues and more student athletes come back, that's where you're concerned. It just it grows. So far our student athletes have been really good. They're excited to be back, excited to start workouts and get going again.
Another question is, have you been following the professional sports leagues that have reopened, or are you currently working on reopening soon? If so, has their example played a role in how you are setting up protocols within your respective schools?
I can maybe answer on that one. Yes, we've been following closely we've been following closely professional sport leagues, and obviously we're in dialogue with those teams here in Denver, and been having discussion with them. We've been fortunate that, for example, the MLS teams have all shared their return to play protocols with us, and how they've moved from individual to small group to team type of training. And so we're seeing those pieces. The caution with professional sports is obviously the controlled environment that they are in some ways able to create with facilities and infrastructure that they have. I think college campuses are very different, and some of the challenges we face with a college campus reactivating are provide some very different challenges that we've got to be mindful of. But they've been, I found that the teams have been great and willing to share information and assist with those things. So if you're close by to any of those, I'd encourage you to try and connect with them.
So we have run out of time, unfortunately. We will answer all questions that come in individually. I really appreciate everyone's time this morning, especially our panelists. We couldn't have done this without you. And thank you, NACDA, for the opportunity to present. And hopefully everybody stays safe and well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.